When we welcome you, it's affording you a tanderum to enter onto country. And as one of the descendants of the first peoples of this land that we now call Melbourne, and we are from the Bunwurrung of the Greater Kulin Nation, I welcome you all here today and extend our hand in friendship to the friends and staff of the Wheeler Centre. Today we acknowledge the traditional lands of the Bunwurrung and to their ancestors. The Bunwurrung were a part of a much larger nation known as the Eastern Kulin of the 5 language groups, our neighbours, the Woiwurrung, the Tanwurrung, the Jajawurrung and the Wadawurrung. It is now over 180 years since the Europeans first arrived in this country, and we now know as Melbourne. The sacred river which flows past us, which is known as the Yarra, but to the first people it's known as the Birrarung. Translates means the river of mist. The Birrarung was not only a source for food and transport, it represented the lifeblood of the Eastern Kulin as it flowed out into our great bay known as Neerven. Today we stand together on this special country and share the respect to each other's diversities, cultures and heritage. In recognising and celebrating our shared history, we all have something to gain. And in traditional society of the Eastern Kulin, we were committed to the maintenance of our society by valuing the importance of learning, showing respect, celebrating life and honouring sacred ground. This importance of learning has been a transmission of knowledge and understanding that ensured our culture survived. This commitment to learning has been a part of every generation since time began, and it's one of the reasons why we are still strong today. Showing respect. In our traditions, visitors are always welcome, but they are required to show respects to the laws of the land, or Wurrungi Bik, law of country. This is the same way we show respects to each other's cultures and religious and spiritual beliefs. And we are here to celebrate the achievements of these 2 writers, 2 young women, to celebrate their life, and also to the arrival of new children, the coming of our 6 seasons, the visiting of the neighbouring clans, was very much an important part of our traditional life. And today, the Wheeler Centre not only represents one of the most important places for the celebration of contemporary Indigenous arts and culture, it also prides itself on celebrating the arts and culture of our multicultural and global society. Respecting sacred ground. We should all acknowledge the sacred ground on which we stand, and Wheeler Centre is a host to many people from many different nations, and we still call upon them to respect sacred ground by understanding its history and heritage of the first peoples of the Eastern Kulin, and what we celebrate today through this gathering of writers. It is the ongoing commitment of the spirit of generosity which remains very much an important part of our cultures. And today it is my hope that we can all take pride in our shared history and celebrate the strengths of our great nations. And according to our traditions, our lands will always be protected by our Creator, Bunjil, who travels as an eagle, and by Wan, who protects our waterways, travels as a crow. Bunjil taught us to always welcome guests, but he required us to ask all guests to make a number of commitments or dumbals. 1, not to harm the Big Biks, our lands. 2, not to harm our Warni, our waterways. and particularly not harm Bunjil's children. And this commitment is made through an exchange of a small bow dipped in the water of the land. So once again, Wamanjika, Marambik Bik, Bunurong, Namderp, Barupton, Willan. And that means you have come with a purpose. Woman, come. Master, come. And what is your intention? Nungujin.
Good evening, and thank you to Auntie Carolyn Briggs for that incredible acknowledgement of country. Welcome to country. My name's Maxine Beneba Clarke, and I want to welcome you to this evening's Wheeler Centre session, Poetry as Processing. I'll be joined this evening by poet Ellen van Neerven, and we'll be celebrating this incredible new collection of Ellen's Throat that has just come out very recently. Ellen van Neerven is an award-winning writer, editor, and literary activist of Mununjali Yugambeh, Southeast Queensland, and Dutch heritage. Ellen's first book, Heat and Light, was a recipient of the David Yanayapan Award, the Dobby Literary Award, and the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards Indigenous Writers Prize. Comfort Food was shortlisted for the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards Kenneth Slessor Prize, and Throat is Ellen's second poetry collection. So thank you very much for joining us this evening, Ellen.
Thank you, Maxine. I'm so happy that we can still go ahead with this event.
So my name's Maxine Beneba Clarke. I'm the author of the non-fiction books, The Hate Race and The Saturday Portraits, and the fiction collection, Foreign Soil, and my latest poetry collection is called Carrying the World. I'd like to begin also by acknowledging that I am on Aboriginal land this evening, the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and the stories that have been told on this land before.
Yeah, I think we should all just take a moment to acknowledge country wherever we might be. I'm on Yagara and Turrbal country, in Brisbane, and I would also like to acknowledge elders from this country. This is the place where I was born and I grew up, and yeah, it's kind of really a special place for me, and I feel privileged to be on this country.
Now, Ellen, I wanted you to start, before we got started on Throat and how you put the collection together and some of the incredible poems that are in there, I wanted to start by asking you how you came to poetry. You know, I'm fascinated with stories about the birth of a poet. So did you always love poetry? Who was the first poet or collection that really made you fall in love with the form?
Yeah, I think such an important question. I remember writing my first poem when I was 11, which was about soccer. Like, I think there was a school competition, and everyone had to write a poem, and so I wrote a poem about, like, because I love soccer, so it was like about being a little soccer player. But that's the only time I remember engaging with poetry when I was a kid. It wasn't until I think I was maybe about 19 or something, and I was studying at university, studying at QUT, and the uni library was an amazing place for me then, I think, because when I grew up, we didn't have books, and we did have the local library, but the uni library having so much content, I guess. And I was also kind of, sort of like, uni was a really great experience for me to sort of meet other, like, young black fellas, young Murrays, like, that were my age, like, we're all, sort of with the same peer group, and there was older staff members there that made us feel really safe, and we did a lot of, like, community events at the uni. And the unit that I studied at, the Aboriginal Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander unit, is called the Oodgeroo Noonuccal unit, Oodgeroo Noonuccal unit, named after Oodgeroo, Auntie Oodgeroo. There's many different things. Like, incredible woman activist, but also a poet. And I was like, wow, there's Aboriginal poets. I just didn't know that. I just didn't really have access to that literature until then. And that I was at that library, and I still remember picking up Ujaru's work, Samuel Wagon Watson, who's a countryman of mine, and most importantly, at that time, Lisa Bellaire's work. I think I could show you. It was such a body memory that I could probably show you the exact spot where I picked that book up off the shelf, not really knowing what it was, other than it was, a work by an Aboriginal poet, and opening the contents. And her poetry book's called Dreaming in Urban Areas. And it just meant so much to me as being this baby poet, discovering her words. I don't think I was writing poetry then, but it was more that I became inspired after reading that work, and after reading Sam's work, and after reading Auntie Ujaru's work. It was just such a kind of lightning bolt, I think. And I've then got to sort of know the importance of Lisa. She's sort of one of my heroes. I never got to meet her, but I met her cousin Kim when I was living in Melbourne, which was really great to talk about Lisa to Kim. And just an incredible person. But those words, I'd like to read a little bit of
That would be incredible.
Lisa. I'd love to read a little bit of Lisa and a little bit of Sam, so you kind of know what was sort of infecting me in the best possible way at that time. So this is from Lisa's poem, quite well-known poem, Women's Liberation, just a little short extract. And she's speaking from, she's like putting on a white woman's voice in this poem, which is really cool. So this is her kind of as a white woman. Should I apologize? Should I feel guilty? Maybe the solution is to sponsor a child through World Vision. Yes, that's probably best. I feel like I could cope with that. Look, I'd like to do something for our Aborigines, but I haven't even met one. And if I did, I would say, all this business about land rights, maybe I'm a bit scared. What's it mean? That someday I'll wake up and there will be this flag. What is it? Red, black, and that yellow circle staked out front. And then what? Okay, I'm sorry. I feel guilt is what I should be shouting from the top of the building.
Incredible. And what was it about this particular poem that really struck you at the time?
The feminism, the Black feminism in this work was just something I hadn't been privy to. Of course I had, growing up with strong Black women in my family, but to sort of, as she breaks it down, she breaks down how non-inclusive white feminism is and how non-inclusive women's movements have been in the past, where there's been so much groundwork done by Black women to sort of get to where we are today. So I was like, wow, this is incredible. Also, the kind of talking about Aboriginal identity in an urban setting was something I hadn't read before. It just like ticked all the boxes. Just felt really fresh, even though it was published in, I think, 1996, and I was reading it in 2010. Just felt so relevant to a lot of things that I was experiencing at the time.
So did you start writing your own poetry soon after that, or did it take a while to kind of come to that point?
I think I was sort of writing bits and pieces. To be honest, I feel new to poetry, and for a long time, well, it's probably a decade that I've been writing poetry, and probably about 5 of those years were writing poetry that I didn't think was any good, and that I was sort of just kind of doing as sort of like therapy, I guess, like getting my words on the page. So it's only really been 5 years of thinking of myself as like getting my work out there and sort of seeing myself as a poet, I guess.
And did you want to read us an extract of Samuel Wagon Watson's?
I would love to. This book is called Spoken Cryptid Whispers. Like I mentioned before, Sam's my cousin. We're both Mununjali. We both have connections to Southeast Queensland. And I read this book and I saw Brisbane kind of transformed. I never would see Brisbane the same again, because Sam has these really beautiful poems about the wetlands that I grew up near, about the mangroves, about the river, about the salt, the mud, and they're just gorgeous. They're just like so musical. So I just wanted to read a little bit of an extract so you can kind of get the feel of, you know, me reading this work for the first time, living in Brisbane, maybe thinking about writing my own poetry. So this is just a few lines from a poem called Poem 9. And like I said, the book's called Spoken Cryptid Whispers, and Sam has a big backlog of work that you can check out, and please buy, please support. Poem 9. How do you know that the mud doesn't feel the pain of your weight upon its resting place? How do you know? Is it voices or wind that pushes the afternoon tide? Does your shadow talk to the land, or is it just a shroud of light? Are we asking the right questions, and can they only be answered here on the wetlands? Are the answers here for our blindness, or is blindness the only answer our ears were content with?
Oh, beautiful. I've heard Sam read quite a few times, and it's always incredible.
Yeah, I can't do him justice. Definitely not.
I feel like there are often, for particularly, you know, poets of color, Aboriginal poets, that moment when you first realized poetry is for me, you know, I could possibly do this. For me, it was a similar experience. I did go to university and study writing, but there weren't, you know, I was pretty much the only person of color in my writing faculty. But I found the library, and probably in about 1998, I was on a trip to London to see my grandparents, who were all born in the Caribbean. And I found this book. I'm not going to read from it today, but I just wanted to hold it up. You know,
cool.
so often poetry books are these little weird kind of publications that are run by or published by a one-man band in someone's garage. So it's called 19 Poets from England and Jamaica. And I hadn't actually looked at the kind of in-print page until yesterday, but it was published in West Germany in 1986.
Wow.
And, you know, just this kind of, I just happened to kind of walk past this shop in Tottenham where my grandparents live, and it was in the window. And I think that really was my moment of, wow, you know, who are these poets? There's these Black poets who are writing protest poetry, and, you know, at the time, dub poetry or spoken word poetry was kind of taking off. So I guess I can really kind of, you know, empathize with that situation of not having studied poetry at school, but it just still didn't feel like something that was
stick.
for me.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like it's for you. It doesn't feel like it's written in your voice or voices that you know. You know, I'm a big believer that, Maxine, that was the ancestors that were kind of guiding us to that moment of like discovering that work that would then open up what we you know then have done, I guess. Is that book one of your most treasured possessions?
Yeah, I mean, I pulled it out yesterday just kind of thinking about, oh wow, this was the first book of poetry that I actually bought, you know, of my own volition, and still have it. I haven't read it for years. But yeah, it really just opened up the world of words for me, and I thought this is for me. It might not be a form that I recognize or have been taught to recognize, but I think you're right. Often we just find the right book at exactly the right time. And you know, when you were saying you could kind of even take people who were watching this to the exact spot in the library where you found this book. I remember walking past the shop window. When you do that double take, you walk past. What was that?
Wow.
Going in and dusting it off. I don't know how long it had been there. I think it was a secondhand copy.
Wow.
But yeah, I'm glad we both discovered those writers at those
Me
particular
too.
times.
Yeah.
So I want to get to talking about your new collection, Throat. It's an incredible poetry collection. It comes on the heels of Comfort Food, which was your 2016 first poetry collection. It's an intimate and worldly collection. It deals broadly with themes of country, family, history, belonging, legacy, and love. And I suppose I wanted to talk a little bit about the journey from Comfort Food to Throat. I think first poetry collections are a really particular thing, and you sometimes write them, or I know with myself, you kind of write them in a vacuum, not really thinking about who's going to read them or this world it's going to go into. So can you take us through what happened for you poetry-wise between Comfort Food coming out in 2016 and Throat being ready for publication?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this second one is a much more self-conscious effort than the first one. I really wanted to develop my work. I wanted it to be a kind of more mature work, but I think the themes kind of remain the same or very similar in all of my work. Writing about family and writing about country and writing about identity, and quite political, personal work. I think this book has, like all books, it has like many different beginnings, because in some ways there wasn't really a kind of full stop where Comfort Food finished and where Throat began, because I remember even writing poems in that kind of weird period between when Comfort Food was kind of finished, but then waiting for it to be in the bookstore. I think I was writing a few poems at that time, that in 2015, that are in Throat. So it is kind of about 4 years of, almost 5 years of writing is in this work, in this book. And I think in the 10 years I've been writing poetry, it's sort of just been building without me being really acknowledging it. But I don't think there's been a period of more than a month where I haven't written a poem. It's just part of my makeup now as an artist, that I'm just constantly kind of, sort of feeling like jotting things down that I may or may not publish. And that was the thing. I think I got to a couple of points where I felt like this was a body of work, but then it was another process again of thinking this is something I want to publish. So I can kind of go way back to 2017, where my friend Paula gave me like a stack of books. I was writing my first play in Sydney, and Paula came round with a stack of books for me to borrow, and they were all books by Black women poets, Black women and gender non-conforming poets, which was really, it was a really incredible kind of vintage kind of, rare editions. There's like quite a diverse selection of work. And she was like, I just want you to kind of have this. So I took those books home to me in Brisbane, and a year later, I gave them back to her, but not before. I remember like flicking through them once again to sort of see what was connecting with me. And I just couldn't walk away from this particular poem, this particular line in one of the books. I remember sitting in a burger joint, eating a vegan burger, knowing that I was going to see Paula in like an hour and I had to give these books back. But still like going back to this one, these couple of lines by Patience Agbibi, who's this Black British poet, and she wrote this book that I quote as the epigraph of Throat. I think this book came out in the mid-90s, but it's a beautiful book. And the lines were, no one's found until they find themselves hurting in the back of the throat. And just hurting in the back of the throat just kept kind of like reverberating when I was writing, when I was thinking about writing. So I remember writing that down in a notebook. And I remember feeling like these poems sort of started to slide together under this concept of hurting at the back of the throat, and kind of, like I think all good work kind of comes from some sort of injury. And so in those couple of years, I was feeling homesick because I spent 2 years living in Melbourne. I was missing country, breakups, but also a real sense of memories, history, intergenerational trauma. This kind of stuff was kind of really just, really in the air. That's what I was writing about. And I thought, I am hurting at the back of the throat, and I want to write about that, and I want to write about things that I'm scared to say, which then also became a really big theme of the book. Things that are going to give me a voice, giving truth to these words, feeling powerful for saying these things. And so I started writing with this collection in mind that was going to be called Back of the Throat, then has now become Throat. I really wasn't thinking about publishing, sort of in two minds about publishing it. I remember being in Europe for a 2-month residency when I was teaching in Germany. Another amazing thing that happened while I was writing this book is that I got to teach poetry. I taught at RMIT for 2 years, first year poetry, and then I taught in Germany for a semester as well, teaching first year poets about poetry. And I was like, I don't know anything about poetry. It makes you kind of really go back to the basics, if you will, like kind of think about what is a poem, why do I write poems, why do I have this specific taste, why do I like the things that I like.
Do you think that experience of teaching poetry changed the way you wrote?
100%. Yeah, I think it made me experiment with form a little bit more, because I really was like, why do I just use the forms that I use? Like, kind of, and it made me like read a lot of poetry because I was preparing the course list and wanted it to be as diverse as possible, wanted it to include poets from every continent, all these different intersections, wanted to be able to talk about that work and do it justice. So I was doing a lot of research, and people say sometimes when you teach writing, you don't want to write, like, 'cause it's too much, and marking students' assignments and everything. But I found the opposite. I was really inspired by my students, like when it kind of, because my whole like teaching method was trying to get them to have an into poetry, because I know it's such a dirty word for some people, and ourselves included. Like we weren't, huge fans of poetry until we found poetry that spoke to us. So it's getting, people sort of like to follow their own journey into trying to find what they like. So absolutely it inspired me. It really helped me it made me even more sure that I wanted to be a poet. And that teaching gig in Germany, which is great, very diverse student population as well. The subject I was teaching was called anti-colonial poetry. I just made my own course, and I got an email from Aviva Tuffield at UQP sort of saying, do you have anything for me? And I just, I don't know, I just finished this section of the book that's all about these poems about being in Europe and seeing colonization from that other side. I just thought, you know what, I think it is a collection now. I think I'm going to send it to Aviva. And that was June last year. So it was very quick to
I
where we
find
are
that
now.
really, I find that really fascinating, that idea of being tapped on the shoulder. I often feel particularly with my poetry, the only time I publish is when someone said, you know, the last book I put out, I was going to Auckland Writers Festival, said, why don't you come and be part of the festival? And I said, yes, you know, that's great. And then they said, here are 6 poetry sessions. And I was like, I haven't put out a poetry book for years. And so I
Right.
never had
Wow.
this big stack of material that then became Carrying the World. So I often feel like it's not until someone taps me on the shoulder and asks that question, and do you have anything? When are you putting the next? Because I feel like almost that process of deciding to publish is almost antithetical to poetry, you know, which is this kind of real, I guess, personal act. It seems more personal than other forms of writing. I don't know what your opinion is on that, but I feel like with other books, I do get to the stage myself of thinking, I think this is ready. But poetry, for some reason, there always has to be a tap on the shoulder.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, because like I said, I feel like I've finished this book 3 times, and there was just all of these layers. But yeah, I wasn't like racing to sort of get it out there. You know, it kind of felt like something that was, yeah, that was really proud of. But I wasn't I was sort of just kind of happy to just sort of let it kind of marinate for a while, I guess.
Will you share a couple poems from Throat?
I will, yeah. And I think that's the best type of writing too, when you're sort of writing it for yourself. And I really enjoyed writing this book. I really, really did. So I'm going to read a couple of poems that are about the theme of family. So the first poem is called Listen. Keep the children safe. Tell them story. Same story. Keep them grounded. In this circle, we will be heard. We will be understood. I want everything for my people. That's our way. She will know more when I pass. That's our way. I call her all of her names. I love you, even though I'm yet to meet you. I'll see you soon. Tell our strong young women, talk up, bub, like your mum and your grandma are at the table.
Beautiful.
Bold and beautiful. I feel burdened by what I forget. I need others to help me remember. Nanny's like my mum. She's generous and special. She'd give us grandkids her last dollar. She'd give us everything she got. Nanny was real good with the one-liners. Her doctors at the Prince Charles would tell you that. Like this one time she was rushed in after having a heart attack, and the doctor said, "It's okay, Mrs. Curry, you're here now. We'll get you a comfortable bed." And she said, "I didn't know they had any here." Like when she couldn't breathe properly and Mum would hum her songs that she knew and hold her hand. And the first thing Nanny said when she could talk again was, "Can you stop that now, please?" When Mum reminds me I see Nanny in the bingo halls, the smokers area of the Wavell RSL, speeding her scooter through Chermy and in her armchair watching B&B. We're still keeping up with Ridge and Brook for your Nan. Rolling our eyes till the next ad break. I remember Mum looking after her and her looking after Mum and me and my brother. This stitching of care between generations pulls us all in. Maybe this way I'll feel even closer to Nanny as I get older and I care for Mum. That's the real story. That's my family.
Thank you. I got this real sense when I was reading this collection of just, you know, knowing you as a poet and also knowing you as a friend, of just kind of being across the table from you. It felt really intimate, you know, like a kind of conversation between friends. And so I guess I wanted to ask, that process of when you're writing a piece, is there any kind of self-censorship or any kind of, that process of going, okay, I've written this poem. Do you ever think this poem is just for me? Were there things that didn't go in the collection because you decided they weren't for publication?
Yeah, 100%. I've written heaps of poems that are just not right for public consumption. Those two works that I just read out, yeah, you can see that they're really about family, and my mum and my nana being such strong influences. Like, it really meant a lot to me. Mum and I were driving in the car today, and she said, "I'm really glad that you wrote that poem. I'm really glad that you honoured your grandmother," and it just made me feel really happy. Like that's all I need. That's the only validation that I need. And so, this work was very much looking back. Becoming more as a sort of getting a bit older, thinking about my ancestors and my elders and my grandma and what she would have had to go through growing up compared to the privilege that I have as someone who was born in 1990, and just all these kind of I just felt like it really like that this was a communal book, that I was writing in a communal voice in some cases. And I sort of just felt like I was writing it to people that I trusted in some ways, like kind of feeling like I was writing it for all these people that I felt like I wanted to honor and I wanted to read it. And then, in that first poem that I wrote, that I read, just read two poems, the second one being about my nana and me talking to my mum about my nana. But that first poem, there's a line in that poem that it was about my experience being at the Tamar Valley Writers Festival in 2016. And I was there, talking about comfort food. And I was on a panel with two Tasmanian Aboriginal elders, Auntie Patsy Cameron and Uncle Jim Everett, and they could tell that I was like nervous, as I always am when I'm talking publicly, because I really want to represent my family and my community in the best way. And there's that kind of the idea of the individual, Western society being like so quick to like put you up on a pedestal as this like individual that's doing this thing, when really, we're so connected, as people from non-Western backgrounds feel so connected to their family, they don't feel that separation between country and personhood. So Uncle Jim said, the crowd was starting to come in, and he said, "Oh, Bub, just like think about your mum and nana being here and just think about talking to them. Don't think about all these people that you don't know and all these faces that are looking at you." And so that's been something that's really been a good reminder sometimes when I write, to sort of think about that.
Because there is, in Throat as well, there is this presence in a couple of poems that kind of recognizes that dichotomy between doing this kind of act of creation that is for country and for community, and for the people that you love, and then that notion of, the reader, who of course you're also writing to and for, but who is a stranger kind of coming into that space. And it kind of, you can see that in a couple of the poems. There was a line in your poem 18 C's where you said, "Careful with the way I pick up a pen, careful with my words. Mum taught me that, culture taught me that." And then there's another poem, Eco-Potent, where you talk about, this idea of being that poet who people are commissioning and wanting to do all of these kind of wonderful things. That's quite almost kind of like the commodification end of poetry. That's very different from giving voice to a community. I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that kind of how you negotiate that as a poet, the difference between the external audience and
Yeah, absolutely. I think because there's all of this kind of institutionalized racism that my communities have experienced. Sometimes the stranger figure, the unknown reader, the unknown person who wants something from you can feel quite intrusive, and sometimes are intrusive in the way they want to maybe commodify your work, or they, want to sort of like that kind of external pressure to do something that you might not be comfortable with or might not be ready for. But then at the same time, I can really see that stranger, that person I've never met, that person that is walking towards me. I can see them as a friend. I can see them as a jimbalang, which is friend in Yugambeh language. So kind of thinking about those two things in the same breath, I think. There's a real kind of internal struggle when you have written a couple of books to sort of go your own way, to quote Fleetwood Mac, and to listen to your own inner voice and not kind of write to expectations. At the same time, commissions have always given me a lot of joy when I'm asked to write a poem, and when I've given a very kind of open scope, I'm amazed sometimes at the expression that comes out from sort of being asked to do something and given a prompt. So there's some really incredible poems that have come out in the book that have come from commissions. One of them was The Only Black Queer in the World, which was commissioned to write a poem celebrating the 40 years of Mardi Gras, which was amazing for me to then be able to honour as many people as I could in kind of thinking about the history of gender, sexuality, even post-invasion in Australia, but also celebrating our kind of modern Aboriginal queer heroes. So that was really, really fun and was part of the work that I was doing already. But yeah, how do you find it, Maxine? How have you kind of found?
I think it's quite difficult to negotiate for me. Well, probably until last year, to negotiate that difference between sitting, in your room, at your desk, wherever you are, at a bus stop, wherever, writing a poem. And there might be years before it sees the light of day. You're not really thinking about it. And then that welcoming of an audience. I did kind of start out on my poetry journey after I discovered poetry, because I discovered dub poets and spoken word poets. I started out as a spoken word poet.
Performance poet, yeah.
So I had that consciousness of audience. I was actually standing up and delivering this work. I was kind of testifying. So not necessarily writing work that I thought the audience wanted to hear, but I had a consciousness of, I'm going to say this, I'm going to deliver this to somebody. But I think that probably heightened last year when I took on the job of writing poetry for the Saturday paper, which, for those who don't know the Saturday paper, it's a weekly paper published in Melbourne, but national, kind of long form journalism and reviews and things. And I've been writing for them for a while, and then proposed a poetry section. So for the whole of last year was writing poems every week. And that really changed, I think, the way I thought of audience, because of course you're writing to a deadline, you're writing to a particular readership, as well as trying to retain your poetic voice and write about things that you care about. And so it's a very different way of working. And you, Ellen, joined me in writing for the Poems for the Saturday paper at the beginning of this year. Sadly, the poetry section is now defunct. But that idea of actually writing poetry to contemporary events as part of a news cycle definitely broadened the conversation with audience, I think.
Yeah. It was such an honor, Maxine. It's one of the best calls that I got in my life, when you kind of, rang me up and asked me if I wanted to join you and Omar and writing, and Paul Kelly, and writing poems for this year, 2020, and I had so much fun writing the poems that I did. And for me, being such a admirer of your work, for you to sort of see me as someone who could do this, I was like, oh wow, okay, big shoes to fill, but I'll give it a go. And you're right, that kind of 48 hour, I'm sure you were like pleased that Omar and I got to have that experience, because it would have been such an individual experience for you, having to sort of write poems to that really strict deadline about it, that were news cycle related. Like, I think it's a very unique experience. Like, I think we were kind of, we started up that group chat of being like, oh, it's like Tuesday morning and I still haven't, I don't have an idea, and it's like due tomorrow and I don't know what to do. But it was great. It was, unfortunately, I do sometimes think about the poems that I didn't get to write, the kind of see the graveyard of all these other poems that I would have written this year for the Saturday paper about those current themes. But it was a great way for me to be able to process such a scary year, I guess. Scary, I don't know if that's the right word, but the bushfires, floods, COVID-19, 2020 has really been, it's really lived up to its name as being that kind of a big year.
Yeah, it was fascinating for me, having kind of written the section for a year, to kind of have you and Omar come on board. It was like an absolute pleasure and a relief that you joined me, because I just thought, I cannot do this again, not for a whole year. And to see the poems that came out, out from both you and Omar, was really interesting, and to be able to have that conversation behind the scenes. I mean, the topic for this evening's conversation is poetry as processing. And I think, that idea of what's going on right now, and I need to write something about it that's actually going to be printed within the next 3 days. That's such a unique concept. Yeah,
absolutely. The first poem I wrote was the Invasion Day poem. Was published that Invasion Day weekend, but also really was thinking about the 250th Cook anniversary this year. Really kind of loaded anniversary for a lot of people. And then writing, I wrote 2 poems after the pandemic was, about the pandemic. And I was like, I was really conscious about that I was writing to this broader audience of people that were in the same boat, and like, how do you kind of comfort people that are sort of feeling so much confusion as we were in that initial time. So it was a great privilege to be able to write so close, kind of in that, I guess it was kind of like writing live, it felt like you were writing live.
And just so many things coming up, with the climate change protests and, George Pell, and just that kind of cycle, that idea of just, I think what I liked about it was I wrote about so many things that I never would have occurred to me to write
What's
about.
your most what was the most unexpected one?
Oh gosh, I think probably writing about the pandemic. I mean, who expects there to ever be a pandemic? So the last poem I wrote was called Generation Zoom.
Generation Zoom, yeah.
Which was kind of about, this process of a new generation coming, and the new ways that we interact with each other. I wrote a poem called Ancient Giants, which was about the Murray-Darling, and just the images of those giant cod, washing up dead on the banks of the Murray-Darling. And although I kind of kept seeing these images, it probably wouldn't have occurred to me to actually sit down and write a poem about what's happening. And I think I wrote much more because I'm diaspora. My grandparents were born in the West Indies. My parents were born in the West Indies. We grew up in London. I was born in Australia. I tend to write African diaspora poems and histories. And so it really located me here. You know, it was, I have to write about what is actually happening here. And I think that was a really great thing for my work, was to just kind of, I think I'd avoided it, and this was a way of doing it, whereas a commission, I have to do it, and it doesn't have to be about me in particular, but it has to be about what's happening at home. Yeah. Shall we read? One of the poems is in Throat, I think, your last poem for the Saturday paper. Are you happy to read Paper Ships?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And then I might read one of mine that I wrote for Sunday.
Paper Ships. I know what you're thinking. How can we save the world when we have barely just survived it? When we have been dispossessed, raped and murdered, erased and orphaned, and lost 90% or more of our kin. When we are just getting to our feet, when we are hurt and barely breathing from the impact, when we have been dispossessed more than once, more than twice, by killings, disease, poison, mining companies, governments, flood, and white fire. Auntie and uncle fight to stay on their sacred land. They won't leave, but we don't see them on TV. Can you guess 2 C words so closely connected? They are almost the same. Cook and... Nice try. Colonization and climate change. Fight one and you fight them both. We endeavour to save this world, guided by elders restoring old science and medicine. A flame burns at the tent embassy in Canberra, still burns. This fire represents many fires, reminding us that we are still here. Australia marks the 250th anniversary of the landing in 2 views, the view from the ships and the view from the shore. When we imagine the shore, we imagine our men holding spears, watching the tall ships come closer, go away. And our women, I've been looking for you. I find you in the absence. I go back home, feel the strong defense of country through the blood and placenta of my grandmothers. With tears in my eyes, with determined bones, the blood seeps through and speaks truth. The ships my grandmothers saw didn't stay in the sea, 250 years of shipwrecks and inhaled smoke. It takes all of our hands to cast the settler imaginary off, lift the masts off, out of the dirt. This is everything I've learned about paper. It comes from trees. The tree and I are one. We breathe together. We look after trees like they look after us. Some are our ancestors. We belong to them. We give to trees to receive. They are our life and death. We never forget. They are in the paper we wear, crap, and write on. Our shelter and healing. Words mean nothing without action. Language is empty without ceremony.
Thank you. I think I'll read a poem that I wrote for the section a while back, just because I thought a really interesting thing about this idea of poetry as processing current events is, you know, this poem is called Fridays, and it was about the time when every Friday kids were walking out of school protesting climate change, which of course now in the midst of a pandemic where we can't gather in groups seems like years ago. So I thought it'd be interesting to read this one, and then maybe we can have a little chat about how the form of these poems and how kind of writing to a set space maybe changes some things. So this
Fridays are still happening though, hey, like online, there's sort of still,
true,
digital activism stuff,
yeah.
But yeah, it's a different.
Just a different. I think that I was kind of struck by that physical thing of, you know, trams and buses packed full of kids kind of eating. On Fridays, our children are bursting train carriages backpacked full of hope, wielding placards bedroom made from flattened cornflake boxes and upcycled tomato steaks. On Fridays, our children raise melodic voices meant for playing tag or jump rope and take to the streets in every city, millions strong, and begging us to know. In the empty classrooms, silence echoes round initial etched desks, and lockers left open spill crumpled science notes. On Fridays, our kids are forced to become adults. On the ball court, a lone grey hoodie hangs, abandoned from the hoop. Every week, our children sacrifice 1/5 of their dreams, and on Fridays, they become exactly who we need. Marching with their arms around each other's tiny shoulders and their iPhones held up viral high. They are brave enough to defy instruction, sure enough to face the future, and smart enough to know their minds. If they save the world or not. On Fridays, our children tried.
I love that poem.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for reading it.
So yeah, in one of the things I loved about Throat was this the range of different forms, and it's interesting that you talk about that experience of teaching poetry and questioning why you write in certain forms, because I think it's rare that I read a collection, sit down and read a collection cover to cover. But I think because there was just such a variety of different kinds of poetry in the book, that was partly why I did it with this, and also because I loved it. But the experience of writing for the Saturday paper, which is a set space, you have a particular rectangle that you have to fit the poem in. So it can't be too short. It can't necessarily be in a particular form. Did that change the way that you approached writing?
Writing for the Saturday paper, definitely, because another thing is those poems are quite long, to fit that space. I think it's like over 100 lines, which is like long for me. Like I've written so many short poems. So to be challenged to write longer poems is really cool, really great. And I do have some narrative poems in Throat. Like there's this long prose poem called Chermy about sort of like an ode to my childhood shopping centre that everyone who lives on the north side of Brisbane knows. And I was also really inspired by the archive poets, the docu poets, people like Natalie Harkin, Janine Lang, Charmaine Papertalk Green, Uncle Tony Birch, that have written these collections that the poetics are kind of this reclaiming of like documents and records that have been weaponized against us. So that really kind of lit a fire to write works that were kind of, experimental in form. And I think Claudia Rankine's Citizen was a big influence also in thinking about, ways to write about whiteness, write about race. There's so many ideas in this. I'm glad that you liked it and you didn't think it was too much. Maybe it's kind of like a chocolate box of like different work, and I was very selective of what I wanted in. There was a lot of poems that I cut because I wanted it to just be really sharp, and just trying to sharpen my pencil as much as I could. The way that poems usually come to me are kind of oral, like through like a line, like a sort of like a line, and like it becomes like a line in a pop song that you can't get out of your head, and I sort of start writing it down, or I might record myself. But then now having this feeling very conscious of form, I then might sort of search for the form that will be best for the poem, and marry them together.
I think that was fascinating as well, was the relationship between the form you chose and the content. And I think for me, that was kind of most present in the portrait. I'm not sure the name of the poem, but the portrait of Destiny Deacon, the artist who, where the words are kind of just floating, spaced across the page. And it has that beautiful, you can read that poem in many different ways, just depending on how the reader's eye moves. And it seems so appropriate to capture an artist in that way, particularly knowing Destiny's work. It seemed really appropriate to the way that you kind of look at their work. Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, there's a couple of poems in here that were inspired by Black artists that were really important to me, and Destiny's one of them. And you know, I feel very hardline on ethics, so I showed Destiny the poem to make sure that it was okay to do that, and she loved it, so I was really happy. And I also really wanted to include that poem, not just because I wanted to honor her work as an artist, because she had honored so many people through her work, so then I wanted to honor her, but also because you might see in my work that I use the spelling BLAK for black. I dropped the C, which is a lot of kind of it's kind of had a big take up in the last 20 years of that, us using that word to describe ourselves, which sort of then gives us that authority to be able to describe ourselves rather than being described in another way. And so Destiny first coined that term, so it was important for me to I think the whole poem is kind of the whole work is kind of littered. The whole book is littered with these like mini acknowledgements of thinking about all of these like parts that make the whole. And it's not just writers that have had it, have made their mark on me. It's the artists, it's right across the board. It's my family. It's all of these layers that have, the past, present, future is so kind of feels so close in this work, I think.
So we're right on an hour, but the glorious thing about having an online event is we can just keep going for another 2 hours, Ellen.
We probably could, hey.
But I thought we did have a few questions sent in to the Wheeler Centre, so when people book, are able to send through questions. And I want to acknowledge that we did get, I think, about 25 or so questions through.
Oh, did we? That's wonderful.
So we'll attempt to answer a handful of them before we log off. But the first one I wanted to ask you comes from Lisa. I don't have a surname. And it was my favourite question to both of us, which is, how did you two get so deadly? And there's a little lull afterwards.
Lol.
So I'm asking that to you, Ellen. How did you get so deadly?
I have gotten so deadly because of my deadly mom, who's an amazing, beautiful, creative woman who made me feel like I could do anything that I put my mind to. So that's why I'm deadly. How about you, Maxine?
I think my answer is exactly the same. Thank my mother. And there was another question that came from Jack, which I think is probably important in this time of kind of homeschooling and this kind of catastrophic world, which obviously has been catastrophic for some of us forever, but this kind of time of pandemic. The question is, how important is poetry for teenagers? So do you often have teenage readers of your work? Have you engaged much with young people?
Oh, it's nice because although the book wasn't written specifically for teenagers, none of my work has been specifically written for young people. I hope that it's open, and it has been open in that I have I've heard it from a few young people that really love my work, and I've talked to young people about my work, and it's really, I feel so blessed that my work has that appeal to young people, because I sort of think about writing something that I would have liked when I was a teenager. And I just wanted to say that I'm really kind of open to talking specifically to young people that might be engaging with my work. And I feel like that's kind of with your work as well, Maxine, like it's really great to bring poets into the classroom, into the virtual digital classroom at this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's kind of young people read and write in short form so much that poetry seems like a natural register to be able to discuss things that are happening in their lives right outside the window and to just explore a whole heap of different things. And, you know, when people say, I can't get kids to read poetry, I think it's that thing of both of us as young poets finding the right book at the right time.
Yes.
They just need to slide the right thing in front of them at the right time. And that does mean going through, you know, it's poetry by stealth, you know, and you know, things that resonate with me aren't necessarily going to resonate with someone else. But I think it's a beautiful time to be just putting things in front of kids.
Yeah, totally. I feel, you know, I don't read at the moment. I don't read any books by white authors, and that's not meant to. It's not meant to be like a. It's not racist, you know. It's not a thing of like. I know that I can learn from white authors, and I know that there are some, you know, really amazing books that I can learn from. But because I had 16 years of schooling, 16 years of education, where my only schooling was white authored material, I feel like I'm playing catch up in reading the works of, I don't know what it is like for you, Maxine, but I'm, you know, making that conscious choice of privileging particularly Indigenous women and gender non-conforming people and people of colour in my reading experience.
Yeah, I think there are books that will be put in front of kids no matter what, or that they'll be able to find no matter what. And so it's that sense of, you know, books like there's a book called Solo by Kwame Alexander, which is a verse novel about the teenage son of a rock star. It's kind of like a rock verse novel written by.
Oh, wow, that sounds
You know,
fun.
there are these incredible. There's a book called The Poet X. I can't remember the author's name, but it's a novel kind of written by an African American woman, a verse novel. So there are these incredible things that are just reaching out to kids.
I went to the bookstore today, and for like younger readers, Briggs's book, you know, it's just been released. That's the like lyrics to. It's just like has beautiful rhythm to it, but then there's all these beautiful illustrations of all these important Aboriginal like warriors and people that are really role models. You know, like it's a really, and just reading it, it was like very much a like poetic reading experience. I just wanted to like you know what I got when I just came home today? My publisher sent me, they did T-shirts of Float. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can. That's fabulous. Can we get them? Can we buy them? Where can we get them from?
I'll get them to like send, you know, maybe they can put something up about how to get, I don't know if you can get, I don't know if it's just for me, but I know it's the most amazing T-shirt.
Poets with merch. It's such a rare.
Yes, I've made it. I have my own T-shirt. I bet you don't have a T-shirt next.
I don't. I'll have to paint one. Do one with a permanent marker or something. I wanted to end by holding up a few books that I love. People are looking for places to go, other people to read. Obviously, the first one is Throat. Everyone has to get a copy of that. The second one, just because I'm cheeky, is Carrying the World.
Yes.
My last poetry collection. I also have an incredible book by Alison Whitaker. This actually is their most recent work. It's called Lemons in the Chicken Wire. The most recent one is called Black Work, also incredible. Omar Sakar's The Lost Arabs. These are all Australian poets. We have Ali Cobby Eckermann's Ruby Moonlight, and actually a really formative thing as a poet as well was, I think, around 2009, hearing Ali Cobby Eckermann read from her book Little Bit Long Time, which was just absolutely incredible. And Lionel Fogarty, the Selected Poems, an Indigenous poet who I've been reading for a very long time, and it's really beautiful to actually have all of these works collected in one place. And I think I have two more. Wild Dogs Under My Skirt.
Oh, love her.
Yes. Avia, she's one of my favourite poets, a New Zealander of Samoan background, and this book, actually any of her books, are just absolutely phenomenal. And the last one is Milla Fiori by Omar Musa. So if you've really enjoyed this chat, and only after you thought throat, you can look up any of these books, and it's just kind of, I think it's really great. I often think people who don't read poetry feel like there are no Australian poets.
Yeah.
Because unless you're looking for them, you don't necessarily walk into a bookstore and see a book of poems. Unless you're subscribing to literary journals that publish them, it's often really hard to find these poems. So yeah, if you're looking for reading recommendations, you can always at me on Twitter or at the Wheeler Centre and let us know what you're looking for, and I'm sure we'd be happy to give suggestions. Do you have any shout outs?
I just love this book. I'm rereading it at the moment. Charmaine Papertop Green. She's a beautiful Yamaji poet from the West Coast. And she's just so gorgeous. I love her work. I really feel like Throat is this kind of like baby book that has all of these auntie books, and I feel like this book would be one of its aunties.
And I think that's the thing. Every poet, we have a long line of traditions, in terms of the people who've influenced you, the people who made you into the poet that you are, whether they're other poets or artists, or it's not just our lives that influence us. And I think that was one of the beautiful things about Throat, was seeing that. And I think often, there's this thought that you don't become a great poet until you're 60. There are no young poets. There are only kind of wizened old poets that live in darkened dens and drink red wine. But I think one of the beautiful things about having found you when Heat and Light and Foreign Soil came out is being able to actually follow your journey, as a poet from book to book. And I think there's something about being there from the beginning that it's kind of every time a book comes out, it's like, oh, okay, this is the next step in that journey. So thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me, and it's been really beautiful to catch up with your journey.
Thank you. I mean, since 2014, when both of our books were both released, and the first books were released in the same year, this has been amazing to also follow your trajectory and read your books, and also feel like I have a companion to walk beside in this journey. Beautiful. And thank you for agreeing to talk to me about Throat.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. We'd like to thank the Wheeler Centre for allowing us to. This conversation was going to happen in person, and we're so thrilled that they were able to move it online for us. So thank you to all the engineering that's gone on behind the scenes for this to happen. I'd like to thank Arnie Carolyn Briggs for that amazing Welcome to Country that started off this session. It was really important that we have that. And we'd also like to thank Australian Poetry, who I think have done wonders in promoting this session for us on their social media. And thank you all at home for joining us, whether you're watching this as it unfolds or whether you're catching up with it later online. The collection we've been talking about is Ellen van Neerven's Throat. Please go out and buy it from your local indie bookseller. A lot of them are doing incredible things with home delivering books and getting them to you as fast as they can. So Throat by Ellen van Neerven, please read it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.